I'm Stephanie Hewley, the Vice President of Education and Humanities, and on behalf of Karen Hopkins, our President, and Joseph Malillo, our Executive Producer, we want to welcome all of you here this evening. We are so excited to have Robert Wilson, Rufus Wainwright, here to discuss with us Shakespeare's Sonnets. It's been described as a surreal pop opera interpretation of 25 of the Bard's poems. We encourage you to see the production. If you haven't gotten tickets, please hurry over to the Howard Gilman Opera House. We'll be performing through Sunday afternoon. Today's conversation is also going to be live streamed. So to all of you out there on the internet, if you're watching, we encourage you to tweet and use the hashtag RWRW and tag us at BAM_Brooklyn. So anyway, the video will also be available after this conversation is over as well. So these artists really don't need any introduction, and I'm going to make these remarks very brief so we can have as much time as possible for their conversation. So Robert Wilson has a long-standing relationship with BAM. He goes back to 1969 with a premiere production of The Life and Times of Sigmund Freud. Since then, Mr. Wilson has brought over 20 productions to BAM, including his most recent productions of Weil's The Threepenny Opera, performed by the Berliner, the Threepenny Opera performed by the Berliner Ensemble, the revival of Einstein on the Beach, which I know many of you saw, and that's with Philip Glass and Lucinda Childs, and last season's The Old Woman with Mikhail Baryshnikov and Wilhelm Dafoe. Yes, I see your smiles on your faces. Rufus Wainwright is one of the great male vocalists of our times. He's a songwriter. He's achieved his success by carving out his own singular sound in the worlds of rock, opera, theater, film, dance. His BAM debut was in 2001 as part of the first iteration of Next Wave Song. Moderating the conversation this evening is Mr. John Rockwell, who he has served as a classical music critic, an editor, chief rock critic, chief dance critic, European cultural correspondent, arts and leisure editor, and arts columnist for the New York Times. Won't you welcome them again? Thank you.
Hi, just for the record, we're supposed to cut this off at 7 because the show is at 7:30. And depending on how the conversation flows, we will or will not have a brief Q&A thing at the end. If we do have it, Molly is going to be running around feverishly with a handheld mic, so hold off on your questions until you get it. I just have a series of questions here, but I'm going to ask them and then stand back, and you guys will run amok. When did you two of you first meet?
I bet I probably remember better. Only only because it was.
Don't insult us. Bob and I are more or less the same age.
Nothing to do with age. But I met Bob first because I would go to the Watermill benefit and in Watermill, New York, and for a couple of years I attended and really, was just overwhelmed.
When are we talking? What?
Oh God, 2000, around 2000, around that time, and I was so overwhelmed by the whole idea and the ambiance and certainly Bob, and I was kind of afraid to talk to him actually or approach him. I was kind of like this little mouse hanging around, but eventually so I probably met him before, but I think it was, but I don't know, when did you meet me?
I think during that time, May Mujan, a mutual friend of ours, I have this center called the Watermill Center that, in case you don't know, it's on Long Island, and it's an international center for the arts and humanities, and we invite each year close to 200 artists to come to create new work. And they also work with me on some of my projects. All of my work is developed there, but we also support young and emerging artists and their work. And I think diversity is our strength, and each year in the summer we have a benefit for the center. And I think it is at that time that we first met.
And just out of curiosity, was Jorn Weisbrot, who's been close to both of you, was he involved in your meeting, or?
Well, I met Jorn at Watermill a few years later, and I don't know. I mean, Jorn Weisbrot, my husband, who
was Bob's assistant and then manager,
and then also manager of. Yeah, it's always. I mean, yes, he didn't introduce us,
Okay.
Bob, but I don't know. There's something. I would just want to say that once you do hang out with Bob and his friends, it does become a kind of extended family across many countries and many age groups and many types of people. So it kind of happens all at once, you know.
Was Shakespeare Sonnets your first collaboration together, the two of you?
Yes.
And how did it come about? I mean, whose idea was it?
I've done a number of works as probably most of you know, for the Berliner Ensemble, and we usually think after we have one production, and they've been very generous in asking me to do many projects. We think, you know, what would be different from what we had just done, and I had thought about doing the Sonnets of Shakespeare. In fact, it had been proposed that I do it years ago at the Kammerspiel in Munich, and decided not to do it. But it was one of the projects that had been proposed by Klaus Peimann, who's the artistic director of the Berliner Ensemble, and I thought, yeah, maybe that would be the right project. And then I was just becoming aware of Rufus' music and this enormous range he has as a composer, and so I proposed him and to the BE, and they liked the idea. They listened to his music, and then I think that's
Well, it
how
also
started.
sort of fits into the sequence of, I don't know whether rock opera is the right word, but all the works you've done with Tom Waits and then with Lou Reed and now with Rufus, so that there's a series of works, apart from the Berliner Ensemble works, there's a series of works for them and other companies that involve singing and music and croaking vocalisms from the members of the Berliner Ensemble and so forth.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to work with many composers of our time, from Laurie Anderson, from Tom Waits to Louis Andriessen to, it goes on and on. But the last work of Lou Reed I did, Lulu with Lou. So whether it's Phil Glass or David Byrne or something, you also think, you know, what voice would be different from the last voice you worked with. And Rufus, the amazing thing about him is that he, at a very early age, found his own voice. And it's unlike other people's voice.
By voice, you mean both singing voice, but also personality as projected.
Personality and the musical sense, you know, it's something. And that doesn't happen, you know, with so many people, that they, at an early age, can find distinctively their style. And so when we hear music, we know, you know, well, that's Rufus Wainwright.
Well, I'm still trying to figure that out, who that is. It might be Rufus Wainwright, but I do feel that, you know, when I was asked to work with Bob, I mean, I was humbled by that list of people like Lou Reed and Tom Waits, and but then again also felt worthy in terms of the great work that he does with, it's really, I mean, he's worked with so many different types of composers, but really that special relationship between songwriters and also specific. I don't know if you've worked with a female songwriter, but there's something about a man how can I say it, with that tradition of male songwriters that, I mean, I don't know if I fall into the category, but I would like to be at least a reflection of people like Tom Waits or Lou Reed, who it's a certain thing. And Bob has always really championed that cause very well.
Who chose the sonnets? Who sequenced them? Who chose what languages they would be sung in? And how did that all work? Was that you and a dramaturg, or was that
No,
you and Rufus?
this is what happened, and I asked them to provide this board here. Let's see. We had a meeting in Baden-Baden, right? And so it was Rufus, myself, and Christine Roman, who works with me as a director, and we've been working together since the early 80s, and Jutta Farber, the dramaturg for this production. And usually what I do, I mean, people ask me many times that, you know, why are you credited as an author, say, for The Black Rider? I mean, William Burroughs wrote text, and Tom Waits wrote the lyrics and the music, and, you know. Well, I put together a structure. And from that structure, we developed the piece. And also in my work, as I guess most of you know, I consider the picture to be a part of the book. I mean, it was 4 times that Washington, D.C. refused to copyright what I'd done as an author for Einstein on the Beach because I gave a book of pictures. See, and usually we think that the stage picture is a decoration for an opera. Well, we started with the pictures. We started with a structure of pictures, and from that the music came. So I didn't look at it as a stage decoration, but as a part of the book. So it's true, I don't write music, I don't write lyrics, I don't write text, but this is what I did in this case. We said, okay, we started thinking about the number 2. So we can say 1 + 1 = 2. Or you can say 2 is 1. So I think, so we started thinking about 2 opposites. Like you have a left hand and a right hand, but it's one body, or right side of the brain, left side of the brain, but it's one mind. Like a yin and yang, it's heaven and hell is one thing. So we said, okay, we divided into 2 parts. And then we said, well, I was thinking about the number 7 being an even number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 7 parts in the first half and 7 parts in the second. But if we think that these center parts are wrapped around 3, so it's like a leg, right? You have a knee, and then you have this part and this part. And then I started thinking about the relationship between 1 and 7, and 2 and 6, and 3 and 5. And then a relationship between 8 and 14, 9 and 13, 10 and 12. And then we started thinking about that 1 can mirror 8, and 2 can mirror 9, 3, 10, and 4, 11. These are in the center, right? And 5 mirrors 12, 6, 13, and 7, 14. So that's pretty much what I did. And then I said, okay, Rufus, Jutta, here's the building, and you can fill it in. And that's what I did when I did Einstein on the Beach. I made a structure that was in 4 acts and 3 scenes that repeated 3 times. So it was theme and variation. I talked to a friend of mine today, and she was very confused. She said, I don't know, I'm confused because there's no story. Well, there are storylines and threads through the piece, but it's theme and variation. So it's a time-space construction. And almost all of my works, and John knows this, I can diagram. So I can tell you rather quickly what the picture is. So it's like an architect designs a building, and all of you can live in the building, and this man can decorate his apartment the way he wants, and these 2 women can have the apartment the way they want, and these 2 can have their apartment the way they want, and everyone can fill it in with their own personality, but there's a cohesion because of the megastructure. So this was a megastructure, and I actually didn't do too much then in the selection. We said, okay, this first half is going to be light. And the second half would be the darker sonnets. And here, as a turning point, we said we're going to make this a dark scene. And here, the turning point, we said we're going to make it a light scene. So in the middle of the dark section, there'd be light. So this image I did was an apple tree, 2 people sitting in front and whatever, a green apple tree, a red apple, and whatever. And this scene here is a destroyed tree. And wrapped around it is a wrecked automobile, a car. So it's a dark image here. And I began to figure it out visually according to this structure. And Rufus and Jutta and Christine began to then say, okay, what sonnet do we think we want to have here? How does it relate here? And how does this mirror here? So it's a time-space construction.
Did you try to make the music match? I mean, did you try to have 4 and
Yeah, I mean,
11 match up?
I mean, for me, there are. I read the sonnets, in a traditional way at first, all of them, and
How many are there?
there's 200 or so, and I kind of, did some research on, the history of them and so forth, and also how they are constructed, each individual one, like and what was kind of, for instance, with number, the first. The tree one, for instance, with the car hitting the tree, I was adamant to use sonnet number 10. And by the way, I mean, none of these, all of these ideas of they were written in this order, or, for this person, like, no, it's all theory. I mean, there's no proof of anything. In fact, I don't think Shakespeare even numbered them himself. But there is something about that sonnet in particular that when in reading them I could tell like that's when the poet kind of fell in love with this other person and that to me is kind of a car crash usually and then we kind of went on from there. Another thing that very much affected me was actually the construction of each sonnet itself, meaning that there's always this kind of shift from either light into dark with a kind of resolution within the 2 couplets at the end within the couplet at the end that states the past journey that you have gone through, that you've risen to or descended into. So there is this architecture in each poem that kind of mirrors the same concept that Bob was working with too. So you had to think. Yes, so I did and I didn't.
Now, I saw the world premiere of this production in Berlin 5.5 years ago, but as I recall, there's a lot of gender switching. In other words, male actors play women and women actors play men. How deliberate was that as a reflection of the sonnets?
Well, it's in a way a kind of Renaissance idea. That in Shakespeare time was played women played men,
or men played women, but usually not on the same stage.
Right, that's exactly right. So it came from that. It was actually Rufus suggested, why don't we have all the male parts played by women and all the women played by men. And again, I think it fit into this idea of two being one. So, as John knows, I mean, I did King Lear with a woman, you know, so. My theater is a formal theater, so I don't really necessarily think so much of it. In a formal theater, it doesn't matter so much, you know. It's like you see a no play, it's all performed by men. So male, female roles are all played by men, and we just accept it. I mean, as being a formal device at presenting theater. So my theater is not a naturalistic theater. I hate naturalism. I think that to be on stage is something artificial, and if you try to be natural, it always looks so artificial. You know? So it's better just to accept it as something artificial, and then you can be more natural in what you're doing.
Well, I just also wanted to say, I mean, for me, it was, my original idea is that, I mean, certainly for men and women and gay people and people of artistic tendencies, I mean, that has always been such a haven for breaking down the barriers of gender and since Shakespeare began. So I think it's also a bit of a homage to that safe place that Shakespeare has given us to shed ourselves of these, boundaries.
In the Times Literary Supplement, the weekly out of London, there's been a kind of controversy in an initial article and then in the letters columns in the last couple of issues about some guy claiming that the only way to read Shakespeare's sonnets is in a, quote, primarily homosexual context, close quote. And other people deny this. 17 of the sonnets are addressed to a young man. Instead of, in other poems of Shakespeare, the women who are being ostensibly addressed are not named. They're just kind of archetypes. Did any of that play into your imagery and or musicality?
Yes, right. Yeah, that was an idea from the very beginning. Yeah.
And in the music as well?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly relate more to the homosexual kind of juices, in the story of in terms of the young man and stuff and those poems, and I can see that, but
it's in the first scene. You have Shakespeare with the young poet addressing, so it's established in the first scene.
But I think with the woman, it's it is, for me, it became more of an interesting relationship that I wouldn't be able to define yet as gay or straight or what.
And I think also, I don't think about things like that. I mean.
Well, you started off the answering the question by saying yes. This was initial.
Yeah, I mean
idea,
that was something we talked about, but I mean it's there, but I'm not trying to necessarily call attention to it. I mean it's there, so that's it.
I have a couple of Bob questions and then a couple of Rufus questions. Bob, this is a big, humongous question which probably can't be answered too easily, but looking at your work from the late '60s and looking at your work now, there's obviously been a big stylistic evolution, even if the Einstein revival I thought was a kind of wonderful modernization, but also recapturing of the spirit of the mid-'70s. But would you say that a key turning point in your stylistic evolution came when you first worked in Germany in '79? I mean, as I recall, that was the first time you'd worked with fully professional actors in a professional context, but there's also a kind of Germanic expressionistic quality now to so much of what you do. I mean, do you see that as a major influence, or?
I think I worked in 1979. I started in 78, actually, and I created work for the Schauspielbühne in Berlin. It's the first time I'd worked with professional actors. They were German, almost for the most part. I worked with it was a text pretty much of nonsense, and they gave me a dramaturg. And I thought, I had written the text myself. I mean, I couldn't imagine what a dramaturg was going to do talking to me about this text of nonsense, but he was very helpful, and to have someone to talk about. And I think that that's when I became more aware of German history, but European literature and history, and actually, in the long run, the piece that was of nonsense, it was all based on Rudolf Hess. I didn't tell anyone at the time, but most of the texts were just things that Hess had said that all of us say. And I think it was a real turning point in many ways, and it happened in Germany. I think so it's again like two things. I mean, I'm very, very different from the way the Germans think, completely different. The Germans, they work with a causal factor. It was very frustrating for all of us, for me and the actors when I first worked there. So I said, could you get up and do something? They said, well, what? I said, do anything. Just do something so we can start. Well, they couldn't do it because they needed a reason why they would do it. They needed the causal factor. And I don't want to know why I'm doing anything. I just do it, and then I look at it, and then I do something else. And if I do know what I'm doing, then I'm blocked. I usually can't work. So I work very intuitively. I often have a structure that I'm working within, but in the filling in, and it's very free. So I'm Bugs Bunny from Texas. I'm interested in effects and the superficial side of it.
Texas part I knew, not the Bugs Bunny part.
Anyway, in the effect factor. So if you start with a cause, you will make an effect, right? Or if you start with the effect, if you want, you can always find causes. But it's a different place of starting. So Germans their education is connected with the Greeks. It goes back to logic and the reason why you do something. And so I just start from a different place. And I think that's been one reason that the Germans have been so fascinated with my work, because it approached, the thinking was different. Mine is more an Eastern idea, more Zen-like, that it's full of reasons and full of meanings, and if you define it, then you negate the possibility of all those other ideas. But I think you're right, John. I'd never really thought about it. Something did happen being in Berlin at that time, in a walled city, and learning. I brought in from the first play, because I was not just interested in the professional actors that were on stage. There were actors trained by Peter Stein or worked with Peter Stein. I was really interested in the old cabaret performers. And I went into home for elderly people and met a lot of the old cabaret performers who were still living at the time. And many of them were Gaga. And I put them on stage. But it was beautiful. We had to see them performing. The old techniques of timing and music that came from Weimar and from the 20s were there, and that was, wow, it was super
That
great.
sort of explains the sort of expressionistic element, but I'm thinking also of the actual look of your shows over the years. I mean, you mentioned Asia. I mean, with the increasing use of sort of white makeup and kind of kabuki style look and so forth. I mean, was that a deliberate or just sort of, I mean, you have such an amazing collection of world art out at Watermill.
Right.
That,
Well, when I first played The Deaf Man Glance, which I showed part of it here, only the fourth act. And then it was a 7-hour work that's silent. I showed it in 1971 in Paris for the first time in its entirety. And we were supposed to do 2 performances. And we ended up playing 5.5 months to 2,200 people every night for a 7-hour play that was silent. That was when my career was established. But the French said, oh, you've obviously been influenced by Japanese theater or Eastern theater. I knew nothing about it. I'd never seen it. I didn't really know too much about theater at all. And years later, when I did see the classical theater from Japan, like the No Theater, the Kabuki, I felt an affinity with it, and the Peking Opera. But before I ever thought I would work in the theater, my favorite actor was Buster Keaton. I liked the artificiality. I liked the fact that it was made up with a white face, and everything was stance. In Charlie Chaplin, everything is stances. It's all timing, and there was nothing naturalistic about it. So somehow I was always attracted to that aesthetic, and so the white makeup, everything being danced and choreographed, I think really comes from something that I was attracted to at a very early age, like the silent movie actors, and that aesthetic.
I'm shifting gears to Rufus now. Did you compose these songs on his structure, your choice of sonnets and so forth, sort of as if you were doing a concept pop album, or do you think of this piece as part of your ever-evolving operatic ambitions?
Well, I really felt that my job sort of between, because you have to remember, this is the first ever theatrical exploit I'd ever was involved with in terms of writing the music.
So this preceded Prima Donna.
This was before Prima Donna. I did this as a kind of test run for writing an opera. I wanted to do something. I said, I'm going to write this opera, and I should probably, dabble in the stage a little bit before I have to, face a 70-piece orchestra. Next thing you know, I'm working with Bob Wilson doing Shakespeare sonnets in Berlin, and so I was initially kind of just freaked out and scared. But then, on the other hand, I think there was a slight advantage to that sensibility because I realized that all I had to do was really listen. I was in the presence of greatness on so many fronts, and in that beautiful city, and also things in my life were troublesome because my mother was very sick at the time. So I didn't have kind of this. I've always had kind of a lot of confidence, but I wasn't revolved around that. I just felt like I just gotta learn here from everything, and so when every sonnet that I wrote music for, I just listened. I tried to just be a vessel to what the words were telling me, and initially I have to say I buckled up sometimes, and I would walk in and I'd be like, I'm not sure where Bob's going with this, and shouldn't the young boy appear at the top of the staircase or something, and with an air machine. I had ideas where I wanted to fight it, but on the other hand, I really I don't know. I just wanted to soak up all the greatness that was surrounding me and be of service to it musically, and I that's kind of was my approach, and oddly enough, there's pop songs that came out, there's operatic leader type music, there's some Kurt Weill esque music, and I don't know. It's just I let it do what it needed to do.
Now, with this, and then Prima Donna, and now there's a new opera
Yeah.
scheduled to come out in 2018, right? Called Hadrian.
Yes.
Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, it's an opera about the Emperor Hadrian and his lover Antinous, and it's
There's a wall.
there's a wall. There's no wall. The wall has been destroyed. But no, it's something. There's a funny. I'm a huge fan of grand opera. I mean, one of my opera has always been sort of my religion, and I've gone religiously since I was about 13. So it means a lot to me, and so I would like to. I know that opera right now is in flux, as it probably always has been, arguably. But needless to say, I think grand opera is somewhat under threat, and I think also maybe a bit of a a poison chalice, and so I don't know, but I care so much about the form that I just want to keep trying to, write music that at one point saved my life with grand opera. So, what better subject than the Roman Empire, and all of that entails.
I mean, you mentioned a 70-piece orchestra for prima donna.
Yeah.
And will Hadrian have a comparable type orchestra?
Oh yeah, and a
will
chorus.
Is there a link between the musical idiom you use for your pop, quote unquote, songs, or is it? Are they different camps?
They're different camps. I mean, they're very much different camps, but very, very extremely related too. I mean, I would say definitely with the sonnets. It's a good example for me musically to see the link between my classical sensibilities and my pop sensibilities. It's a wonderful piece to really investigate that relationship.
As I recall from the premiere in 2009, you sang at the end one song, was it, or two?
I sang one song.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever done that since?
Oh yeah, I sing those songs. I still sing.
Are you
those
going to
songs.
sing it tonight?
I don't know. I took the red eye from L.A. So,
Did you record the whole? You recorded. Is one of your records the songs from this?
One of my albums has 3 of the sonnets.
3, right? Okay. Okay, my sort of. Well, I have a question, and that is, it's been 5.5 years since the premiere in Berlin. Why so long before it got here?
Well,
Too much Bob everywhere.
I think that, usually it takes a few years after I created work in Europe. I mean, there are almost no works created here. My work is imported, so that one needs to find the financing for it. In this case, my namesake, Robert W. Wilson, I'm Robert M. Wilson. We showed him a videotape of it, and he was interested, and then it took some time then to get the financing in order, and yeah, it's a big work. I mean, we have the company that comes here from Berlin, from the Berlin Ensemble, are I think 70 people, 70 plus. So it's not easy to move that many people here and to find the financing for it.
Is it playing anywhere else in America besides here?
No.
But it's part of the repertoire at the
At Berlin, sure. It's been steadily in.
Yeah, no, it's always.
I mean, it's so interesting that the Berliner Ensemble was Brecht's theater, and it's evolved in this kind of fascinating way, especially into a theater that features so much of your work.
Yeah, it's very curious. I made a play in 1968 called The King of Spain, and Stefan Brecht, the son of Bertolt Brecht, came to see it. We only did 2 performances, and it was, I don't know, a couple of hours long. It was silent, and not too many people came. It was at the Anderson Theater downtown on 2nd Avenue, and I think the first night there were several hundred people there, and most of them left before the end. And Second night, the same thing. There were even fewer and more people left. But Stefan came backstage and said, I'm fascinated by what you're doing. He said, I think it's really great. And we have a production of the Three-Penny Opera that's going on Broadway with Barbara Harris. And he said, I don't like the direction and I want to stop it. Would you come in and take over and direct it? And I said, I don't know anything about theater, and I can't imagine that I could do such a job. And then he called me, and we had lunch twice, and he wrote me letters, and I said, no, I really can't imagine doing something like that. I don't know anything about theater. I don't know anything about music. So I didn't do it. And actually, I'd forgotten all about it. And then when I did the Deaf Man Glance in Paris, Stefan was in the production, and his mother, Helena Weigel, came to see it, and she was performing.
One of the greatest actresses I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and she looked very much like, her son looked very much like his mother. And I met her, and then she said, oh, if you're in Berlin, come to the Berliner Ensemble. And so due to the success of the Deaf Man Glance, I was asked to direct an opera at the Staatsopera in Berlin, and I went to Berlin for the first time. And I went to the Berliner Ensemble to see his mother perform. Tickets had been arranged, and they told me she had died the night before. Anyway, years later, Heine Müller, after the wall came down, was asked to be the artistic director of the Berliner Ensemble. And then he came to me and he said, would you accept to be co-director with me? And I said, oh no, I don't want that responsibility, and I can't imagine doing such a thing. But it's so strange that this theater has kept coming back to me all of my life. And then when Klaus Peimann came in, one of the first things he did, he was a co-producer of the piece I did with Tom Waits of Wozzeck, and then I did Danton's Tod there, and on and on and on. And so
How many people still in the ensemble there actually worked with Brecht, if any?
I think there's one left.
Do they see a connection between your style and Brecht?
Yes, they do. And actually, it's changing a lot because, the most part the theater is naturalistic, psychological, and Brecht and I are quite different, but there are many things that are similar. When I first met Heiner Müller, the German playwright, he said, the things you talk about, he said, are so Brechtian. And your work reminds me so much of Bertolt Brecht. I actually didn't know anything about what Brecht was doing and talking about in theater, but Brecht talked about having an epic theater where all elements would be equally important. So if it was a chair or something you saw or a text or whatever, it was all a part of a whole, and all the elements were equally important. So that's something we share. And also there's certain sort of formality in the distance and the way a text is delivered or the way one presents oneself on stage. It's a more formal way of behaving on stage. And in a formal theater, there's a certain distance you keep from the material that allows a space for the public to enter the stage instead of insisting too much on the audience attention or demanding too much of what they should think. Or there's a distance, there's a space for reflection, time to think.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that musically too, what was really interesting for me and great was that I being both an opera lover and a singer myself who tends to really push the envelope vocally or try to hit the highest note around and go as low as possible. Within the Berliner Ensemble, there's a whole variety of voices that I was faced with. People who, like, there's a guy Stefan who has one of the most insane high ranges that I've ever heard, but then I would say most of them were not singers in the classical sense, and even in America with Broadway, where the people get so trained and they can read a score and they can deliver the lyrics perfectly. It seems with the Berlin Ensemble you were handed this sort of very unusual bouquet of talent, and that was that was a big part of my writing of the song.
So you wrote for specific voices?
Yeah, for writing for specific voices, and voices who weren't necessarily singers. But they could certainly carry a tune, and they could express, but it wasn't about their pipes necessarily. It was more about their.
I think that's also part of what's brilliant about Rufus is that I know that when I first worked with Tom Waits, it was really painful for him to hear someone else sing his songs, because he wanted them sung the way he sings. Well, no one can sing like that, So that that was amazing. Rufus immediately adapted to other personalities and could write for them. But just to further what you were talking about, the Berlin Ensemble, if I would work with an American company, it would be much, much, much more difficult to work with those actors than to work with the Berlin Ensemble, because this Brechtian idea of theater is much closer to my work, and it's just something that happened naturally. It was not something I studied. If I'd gone to school and studied theater, I'd never be doing what I'm doing. I just did it. And
well, Bob also evolved out of the worlds of architecture and painting, and so when you say, it sounds like you're being falsely modest, but it's almost true that in the late 60s, you didn't know anything about theater, that you had evolved with this purely individual theatrical form out of the worlds of painting and architecture and design.
that's true.
Since we had talked about the 5.5 years since the premiere of this piece, are there other major works of yours that you have done abroad that might be coming here or you hope could come here?
Well, I spoke to Joe Melillo last night, and I wrote him a note this morning. I would like to bring from the Berlin Ensemble my production of Peter Pan that I did with Coco Rosie.
Brooklyn group.
It's two Brooklyn girls. I think it's a very different musical world than what Rufus is doing. Visually, it's very different, and yet it's the same. Proust said he was always writing the same novel, and Cézanne said he was always painting the same still life. So in a sense, one's always discerning the same patterns. But I think that it's very different, and so I think this is very different, say, than the Three Penny Opera that we did. It's certainly different from The Old Woman. It's has a style or a signature that's the same, but so I would like to bring.
Did Joe sound open to this prospect?
Yeah, he hasn't seen it yet, so I want to get him to see it. And it's so completely different from the Broadway Peter Pan, the one, say, Jerome Robbins did, certainly different from Walt Disney's Peter Pan. It's actually, if we went back to the original story, it's a very dark story.
And what about this production of The Blacks, or Les Nègres, in Paris?
That would be great to bring here, too. I saw the production that was done here.
This is Genet.
I worked with a wonderful. I was terrified to do it, and I didn't really want to do it, but I was asked to do it. And sometimes you think, what you should not do, and then you do that. And I thought, this play seems very dated to me, and I couldn't imagine to find my way into it. But I did, and then I found out that it was very timely. And I I put another twist to it. I worked with actors from Africa. It's an all-black cast, and they're from Mali, they're from Rwanda, they're from the Congo, and they're wonderful. All these different accents and very different personalities. It's very amazing to bring this group of black people together today, and the situation we have in Africa today. It's, I made a prologue for the work. It's, I think, very contemporary, and put it in front. But I did it. I opened with a mud house, a doggone house, and it's very much like a situation what's happening in Mali right now. And then that goes away, and split seconds, 4 seconds later, you're in Las Vegas with flashing lights and bright colors, and it's another world. But and I worked with Dickie Landry.
Oh, yeah.
The music is, John is fantastic. I
Dickie
mean,
Landry was in Phil Glass's original ensemble back in the 60s, but he's been living down in the bayou for 45, 50 years.
he's a saxophonist, and the music is beautiful. It's a solo sax all evening long, and great jazz. Beautiful it is.
Listen, I am very sorry that we didn't have time since they were doing so well for the question and answer part, and we do have to cut it off at 7, which is now. But thanks to Bob, thanks to Rufus, thanks to you.